Meeting with the VP of Sudan. On another one of my early trips to Africa, we got an opportunity to speak with the VP of Sudan to talk about our product line. This is the story about that trip. We were in Kampala, Uganda, when this opportunity surfaced. My associate, Frank, had been talking with a contact, and he got permission to see the VP. He approved people such as us to present our sales proposals for things that might help his people. I was an inexperienced third world traveler, but I was sure we needed a travel visa to get into Sudan. I made a quick internet search for the requirements. They were as follows. They needed an original, signed U.S. passport with at least 6 months of remaining validity. I had one. Passport type photograph. I had one. Itinerary. I had one. Copy of round-trip tickets or confirmed itinerary. We had not purchased yet. Bank statement showing proof of sufficient funds. I didn't have one. Official letter of invitation approved by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Sudan. I didn't have one. No Israeli stamps. The passport must not contain any evidence of prior or intended travel to Israel. I never had one. I'd never been to Israel. The cost of the visa was $300, and it would take 60 days to receive the visa. I was positive I wasn't going to get a visa. Frank had connections, so to speak, and he told me not to worry. This is Africa, my friend. Anything's possible. We drove to a small office located in Kampala where one could acquire a quick visa. We pulled up the place, and it had a guard at the door. The guard asked us what we're doing there, and we told him what we wanted. He told us to go inside and continue to the office. We walked across a quad where everybody there was armed except Frank and I. Once inside the office, it was rather shabby and filthy. The place did have a secretary, and she asked what we needed. We told her, and she said to have a seat on an old couch in the corner of the room. After about a half an hour, we were told to come into the office. It was hot, but the man behind the desk had on a black suit, which is the business dress in Africa. We asked what we needed and when. We explained our situation. He told us because the time frame was awful short, it would cost us. He asked for $100 each up front. I had just been told it would cost $300 each from my own State Department. We paid, and then he told us to leave our passports. I was scared to death about leaving my passport. That's when I learned a few more things about Frank than I really wanted to know. He looked that guy straight in the eye, and then he looked at me. And then he said, I've known this man most of my life, and he knows for absolute sure that I will kill him if he screws us around. That wasn't small talk. That was the truth. But Frank told me it was okay. We gave him a mobile phone number and left. Later that day, we received a call to come back to pick up the visas. I was happy, and we got our passports back. To this day, I'm still amazed at how things get done when you know the right people. This is Africa, my friend, has far more meaning to me than it did before I experienced the full magnitude of that well-used statement. We were told then to go to a private airline, and we could get less expensive tickets. We went to an address located just outside the Entebbe airport, in a maintenance area. When we walked into the office, nobody was there. A walkie-talkie was laying on the counter with a note that told us to contact him via the walkie-talkie. We did so, and asked if he had any openings. He said he had 2. We told him we wanted them both. He told us to leave $50 each for a deposit, and he would collect the rest when we got on the plane. Upon arrival at Entebbe Airport that next morning, we asked where to find our airline check-in. We were told that the airline didn't have an actual departure desk. Just go down on the tarmac and get in the plane. They only have one plane, so you can't miss it. No security, no check-in of any kind, and down the stairs we went. Once on the tarmac, We saw the plane and walked over to it. The day was hot. There was nobody in the plane, so we stayed outside. It was a small plane that would hold about 8 passengers, some loose luggage and cargo. Finally, the pilot and co-pilot showed up and told us to board the plane. It was just like the early days of flying. There were no doors between the pilot and the passengers. I took the seat just behind the pilot so I could see out the window. A few other passengers showed up and they loaded some cargo on the plane. Only a few minutes later, we were in the air. The flight was not terrible. It took some time, and it was obvious we weren't traveling very fast. Eventually, we arrived in Juba. It was a small airport and very sparse. We unloaded, and my associate had a friend show up with a UN vehicle to take us to our motel. Arriving was a shock. Finding a place to stay was harder than anticipated. There was a cluster of what looked like shipping containers converted into motel rooms. It was still deathly hot, and I was exhausted. We checked in, and I was surprised to find they didn't take credit cards, as they were against the law there. Oh, that worked out good. Cash only and cash up front was the only way we could get a room. For a mere $175 a day, I could have a room. I agreed, and when I got to my container, I was met by a large lizard sitting out in front of the door. I shushed him away and went in. Next thing I knew, the thing was in my room. He went under the bed, and I never did see him again. The room had an air conditioner, so I turned it on. But just as well I snapped my fingers because it didn't work. Come to find out, it wouldn't have made any difference as they turned off the generator at 11 p.m. and turned it back on at 7 a.m. That's when and if they had diesel fuel. Diesel fuel was in high demand, and their shortage lasted for days. The next morning, I turned on the shower and reached in to touch the water. It was warm no matter how I set the faucets. I looked at it, and the water was as brown as it could be. When you can see the color of the water as it's coming out of the shower, it's not a very good feeling. I kept thinking, you stink, you have taken your shots, so suck it up and get in there and take that shower. I had no choice but to tough it out. I had some time to kill, so I thought I would venture outside and look around. The water pipes were all above ground, as it doesn't freeze there, and besides that, the building wouldn't last long enough to go through the trouble. I decided to trace the pipes back to their source. I found a large above-ground tank that was sitting about 20 feet off the ground. I looked over and could not find a wellhead. What I did find was a hose that fed the tank. Now, I don't know where this came from, so I was curious and I kept looking around. Eventually, as I was walking around, I kept following it, and it ran over a hill. I walked up to the edge of the top of the hill and looked down. Can you imagine this? The Nile River runs through there, and it's filthy. I saw the line attached to a gas-powered ditch pump, and the suction line was located just over the bank in the river. That was the water they expected us to use to bathe in. I must admit, I was disappointed. The Nile, portrayed in the books, history, and movies, is one of the more magical and mystical rivers. Today, you can see large collections of garbage and every now and then a dead bloated cow floating down the river. What in the hell had I got myself into? I thought I'd seen a lot of things at this point in my life, but this was hard to deal with. I needed to see the VP and get the hell out of there. Still, not knowing where the lizard was hiding, I went to bed thinking we would see the VP tomorrow and get home as soon as possible. Boy, was I ever going to get a surprise. Frank and I made our appointment and showed up on time. We went into the office where we were met by his security people. They were an intimidating bunch of 6 guards. These men were all business, and we were searched. They were all ethnic Sudanese. One was scary as hell. He was tall, slender, and had scars on his face from a rite of passage cutting. At first, he would only speak in his native tongue, but after he and my associate talked for a while, he loosened up. We were told to sit in the adjoining waiting room just outside the VP's office. All 6 men never took their eyes off of us while we were waiting. We waited for about 2 hours, which is a very acceptable African custom. When a man emerged and said the VP was too busy to see us today, we would have to make another appointment for the next day, which we did. This went on for several days. After 8 days, we again complained to one of the guards. By this time, they had loosened up a little and knew we were not there for anything other than business. We asked him if this was ever going to happen, and he told us the VP was interested in what we had to offer, but things just kept coming up that were more important. The guard then went on to tell us that this man works 24/7 and sleeps only when he must. Most of his guards had been with him when he was in the bush, trying to oust the current government at that time in charge of Sudan. He was a man held in high regard, and they made no bones that they would die for him at any moment. He asked if he would be interested in seeing him during some midnight hours when he was between things to do. We responded with a yes. It was then he gave a personal cell phone to my associate and told us he would call when the VP was ready, but beware, it might be at 3 a.m. By that time, I'd ran out of cash. They needed more money for the motel, and we had little or nothing to eat at the time. I went to the U.S. Embassy and looked for help. What a treat to be on the U.S. soil once again. I told the lady at the desk what my problems were, and she told us there was nothing she could do. I asked to see someone higher in power and was told the only person who could help me was a lower level HR person. So, out to the pool we go, and I stated my case. I told her I had no cash but plenty of money. All I needed was a way to have money wired or be able to use a credit card for cash withdrawal. She looked at me like I was speaking in a foreign language. Long story short, I was told that that was my problem and they could not help me. I was mortified. What the hell is an embassy good for if not to help its own citizens when they're in trouble? I know they're there to work government to government, but we were both Americans. One American helping another American is not a sin. Mad and frustrated, I left. As a last resort, my partner told me he knew a few people working in the area and that he would see what they could find out. A few hours later, he came back with $3,100 bills. That was like manna. We were set for a few more days. We finally got the call, and we were told to meet at a specific location in town. We would have to wait at a gate, and a guard would come to get us. When the time came, we went to the designated address. All we could see were Hummers parked all over. The place was surrounded by a high fence, and there were guards of all kinds standing on top of the walls with AK-47s in hand, watching for your every movement. We introduced ourselves and waited for the guard. It was now about 3 p.m., and the sun was beating down on us. I was wearing that typical black business suit, and it felt like I was wearing a fire suit. That was most likely the hottest I'd ever been in my life. In due time, the guard arrived and escorted us to a place outside a large house located in the center of the compound. The place inside looked like a small restaurant with a cooking pit, a bar, and some sun shelters. People were sitting under the shelters, but we were told to sit at a plastic table out in the sun. The guard left and told us when the meeting inside was over, the VP would talk to us. We waited for about 2 hours in the sun. Finally, a person came over to ask if we needed anything to drink. I responded with a great big yes and ordered water, as much as I could get. I was hot and dehydrated to the max. I needed liquids. When the waitress returned to our table, I started to scoot back by picking up my plastic chair. The ground was uneven, and by that time the chairs were burning hot and soft. When I started to set the chair back down, the leg folded up underneath the chair, and I made a half-gainer flip into midair, landing on my stomach in that red dusty clay. Consider the fact I had on a black suit and tie. My shirt was soaked with sweat, and I was now laying face down in a puff of red clay. I got up and looked a mess. My black suit was covered in red clay dust, and my shirt was stained by that red clay, which never did come out. This was not the best way to look when you're going to meet with the most powerful man in Sudan. My associate took one look at me and went into hysterics laughing. I saw an open-air sink a few feet away and went over to clean up. I took off my coat and cleaned it the best I could. My shirt was a wreck, and the more water I put on it, the worse it got. I made the best of the situation, turned it inside out, and put it back on. It was now starting to get a little dark, and I thought I might be able to pull this off under any bright lights. While I was washing up, 2 Sudanese Special Forces soldiers were sitting in the shade, pointing their fingers and laughing at me. I didn't understand what they were saying except for 3 words: stupid white guy. I sat back down and drank my water, taking a serious ribbing from my group. That's when my associate took me off to the side and told me, "We have no business being here." I asked why. He told me, "You don't know what these uniforms mean, but I do. They're Sudanese Special Forces, Ugandan Special Forces, all armed and ready to go. That's not too bad. But the 12 guys sitting in a circle just to your right are all mercenaries fighting for a group of guerrillas in Uganda. This is not a good mix of people. I know many of these guerrillas as I met them during my time with the RPF in the bush. There is one who's the baddest of the bad. He catches kids and cuts their lips off just for fun. If anything happens while we are here, they will shoot anything and everything that moves. You, my friend, are a person closest to them. They're sitting in a circle because they don't trust each other. They would just shoot each other just as easy as they would you. If anything happens, grab my suit coat and don't let go." Oh boy, that really put me at ease. If I wasn't going to die from a heat stroke, I was going to possibly get shot. The day crept on for hours. Finally, at 10 p.m., the meeting broke up. All the people from the inside of the house came out, and it was very easy to say no one was happy. I found out later that there'd been a meeting between Sudan, Uganda, and the guerrilla forces to barter a ceasefire between the Uganda and the guerrilla group. They could find no common ground, and the VP was angry. With that, we were told to leave, and we ran out of there like our butts were on fire. We hadn't eaten all day, so on the way back to the motel, we found a little outdoor place that served food. It was late, but they said they would feed us. The waitress came up to the table, and she was wearing a pistol. Imagine that. She asked us what we wanted, and we told her. I couldn't help it. I asked why she had that gun. After just surviving what we had been through that day, I needed to know. She told me she was sick and tired of getting hassled and sometimes mauled by the customers. She made it quite clear if we made any trouble, she would shoot us. She said, "I won't kill you, but I will shoot you." At that point, I was a believer and immediately had no more questions. We ordered a goat cheese pizza, which was actually very good, and we went back to our rooms. Finally, the time arrived on day 11 that we would meet the VP. We again arrived on time. His guards went through the same security ritual, and we were admitted. I was introduced to a man towering the size of Shaq O'Neal. He was huge. His hands were like bear paws. I was scared to death until he spoke. He was professional and spoke perfect English. We made small talk, and I asked him if he'd ever been to the United States. He told me he had a doctorate in marketing from Stanford. He had lived in the United States for quite some time and liked it. My associate and I made our presentation, and it went very well. He told us he would consider it and then asked if I had any other talents. I made my case and told him that up until a few years ago, I was heavily involved with mechanical contracting. He told us if we wanted to come back and do development work in the housing or hotel market, he would welcome the opportunity to work with us. Overall, I was happy with the meeting. I was happier to know that we could finally leave. We scurried back to the motel. I told the lizard goodbye, and we left for the airport. I had $200 left in my pocket. We called our plane, and we went to the desk. The man sitting behind the desk told us we needed $100 each to leave the country, and I gave him the bills. That's when he growled, "These bills are fake." All I could see at the time was the last few people boarding our plane, and I was being detained. I argued and pleaded my case, that those bills were legitimate, and that's the last two of these bills that I had. My associate and he had a pretty long discussion in their own language, so I don't know what was really said. All I know is that when he got back behind his desk, he told me, "If these bills are no good and you ever come back again, you'll never leave this country." With that lasting impression, I never even considered the thought of ever returning. The flight was supposed to be a direct connection to Entebbe, but this was Africa. We made an unexpected stop. We were flying along when suddenly we made a quick drop in altitude. We landed on a gravel runway out in the middle of nowhere. The pilot jumped out of the plane, and the co-pilot started out of the plane on the other side. That's when I told him I was hot and asked if I could get off the plane for some air. He hesitated and finally said yes, but told me to just stand by the plane. He turned his back to the door and stepped backwards out of the plane. I got up, put my butt through the door first, thinking it was just a long step. I moved backwards when I promptly lost my grip and fell out of that damned airplane, laying on my back on the gravel runway. I skinned my arm and it was bleeding, but no real harm. My partner was embarrassed but laughing. I asked him for my camera. I was standing there looking around and watching them unload something that disappeared into a small building. They came out and loaded something else on the airplane. Just then the co-pilot came around the side of the plane. He made no apologies that he was mad and told me to put that camera away and get back on the airplane. He told me, "You take no pictures or I will take it away from you." I quickly got back on the plane and took no more pictures. The unexpected landing turned out good in a way because we left flying low for a short time, getting to enjoy the scenery up close. Visiting Sudan was an unexpected experience I will never forget. The biggest lesson I learned was that we live in the United States have no concept of real poverty. What I saw in Sudan was people who were happy to be alive and just glad they woke up every morning.